Behind the glamour, the golden lights, and the silver screens of old Hollywood, there was a darker truth no one dared to speak aloud. These weren't just matinee idols and red carpet legends. They were powerhouses who ruled with iron fists, shattered egos, and crushed careers. In a world where image was everything, these 14 stars wore masks of charm, hiding the bullies beneath. This is the untold story of Hollywood's golden age tyrants, icons who got away with everything until now. John Wayne, the Duke who didn't take no for an answer. John Wayne. The name alone conjures images of rugged heroes, moral certainty, and iconic Western showdowns. But off camera, the Duke played a very different role, one where charm turned quickly to confrontation, and respect was earned only on his terms. Wayne didn't just walk onto sets, he commanded them. Known for his booming voice and steely presence, he could silence a room without saying a word. Directors bent to his will. Co-stars feared crossing him. Even producers, those who signed his checks, tread lightly around the man in the cowboy hat. Behind that square-jawed image was a fierce personality, unwilling to compromise. If he didn't like the script, it got changed. If he thought a fellow actor wasn't up to par, they were out. And if you challenged him, whether politically or professionally, you'd find yourself on the wrong side of a very powerful Hollywood wall. Wayne's vision of masculinity was absolute. He had little patience for actors who weren't tough enough by his standards, and even less tolerance for directors who tried to pull rank. On more than one set, tensions boiled over. Stories from insiders tell of shouting matches, deliberate cold shoulders, and subtle acts of sabotage. But here's the twist: audiences loved him. To the public, he was America's cowboy, a figure of strength and conviction. That unwavering image made him untouchable. And maybe that's why, for decades, his behind-the-scenes behavior was simply swept under the Western rug. In the end, John Wayne didn't just star in Hollywood's most iconic films, he dominated its culture. And for those around him, working with the Duke meant stepping into a world where one man's rules reigned supreme. Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood and the set. Clark Gable. With that devilish grin, effortless charm, and the unforgettable Rhett Butler swagger, he wasn't just a star, he was the star. Nicknamed the King of Hollywood, Gable ruled the screen with charisma. But behind the scenes, that crown came with a heavy hand. Gable knew he was the prize, and he acted like it. On set, he expected everything to orbit around him, from the camera angles to the attention of the crew. Directors learned quickly, if Gable didn't approve, scenes got res hot. Schedules changed. And co-stars? They were often left playing catch-up to his ego. He especially clashed with leading ladies. Though the chemistry sparkled on screen, off-screen there was often tension. Gable had a reputation for being dismissive, impatient, and sometimes downright cold if he felt a co-star was too green or too confident. Behind his smirk was a sharp tongue, and he wasn't afraid to use it. There were whispers from wardrobe and makeup teams of quick tempers, stormouts, and a man who didn't like to be told no. He liked control, and he liked getting his way. And in a town where stars were worshipped, Gable leaned fully into that power. But perhaps the most unsettling stories are the subtle ones, the moments where younger actors were steamrolled in scenes, cut from storylines, or given little room to shine when sharing the screen with the king. It wasn't just about being the best, it was about staying on top. Still, the public adored him. Studio PR teams polished his image to a perfect gleam, and moviegoers saw only the charm, the wit, the mustache, the suits. To them, Gable could do no wrong. And in a way, that's exactly how he liked it. Clark Gable played many roles, but none more convincingly than the one where he ruled Hollywood and everyone in it. Bing Crosby, the velvet voice with an iron will. Bing Crosby, that smooth, soothing baritone. The effortless smile. The man who gave the world White Christmas and seemed to embody calm, gentle Americana. But behind the warm glow of the spotlight was a star with a frosty edge and a reputation for control that few dared to challenge. Crosby wasn't just a singer or an actor. He was an institution. For decades, he was one of the most powerful figures in entertainment, commercially untouchable and personally impenetrable. But with power came dominance, and Bing knew exactly how to use his. He liked things done his way. On stage, in studios, or behind the scenes, Crosby ran a tight ship. If you didn't meet his standards, or if he got in his way, he'd shut you out faster than a missed cue. He had little patience for mistakes, and even less for personalities that clashed with his. Though he often wore a calm exterior, insiders described a different Crosby, one who could be cold, exacting, and quick to remind you who the star really was. Musicians who worked with him spoke of unspoken pressure, how every note had to be perfect, how timing had to be sharp, and how the room got quiet when Bing was displeased. And then there was his influence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Crosby had the power to make or break careers with a phone call, a look, or even just a shrug. He moved through the industry like royalty, and very few ever dared speak against him. Why would they? This was Bing Crosby, the man whose records filled every home, whose face smiled from every marquee. Yet behind the melodies, there was always a chill in the air. Because when the music stopped, Crosby wasn't there to play nice. He was there to stay on top. Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board, and of Getting Even. Frank Sinatra. He wasn't just a singer. He was the voice, a living legend, the man who could melt a room with a ballad and freeze it with a glare. But if you looked beyond the tuxedo, the martini glass, and the spotlights, you'd find a figure who didn't just dominate the stage. He dominated everything. Sinatra played by his own rules, and heaven help anyone who didn't. From the early days of crooning to the height of Rat Pack fame, Sinatra was known for one thing almost as much as his music: power. He had friends in very high and very shadowy places. He didn't have to shout to get what he wanted. A quiet word, a phone call, or even a sideways glance was enough to send shockwaves through a studio. He held grudges like gold. If a journalist wrote something he didn't like, they were blacklisted. If a director pushed back, he walked off the set or got them replaced. Stories circulated of tense silences on sound stages, icy ultimatums behind closed doors, and a man who knew exactly how far his influence reached. Even among his peers, Sinatra made his dominance clear. He expected loyalty from his inner circle, complete loyalty. Members of the Rat Pack, crew members, even big-name co-stars all learned you were either in Frank's favor or you were out. There was no in-between. And yet, to the public, he was a dream. Suave, witty, larger than life. His voice touched hearts. His style set trends. But to those who worked with him, those behind the curtain, there was always that question. What happens if I say the wrong thing? Because Frank Sinatra didn't just entertain America. He owned his stage, his image, and for a time, a terrifying grip on Hollywood itself. Orson Welles, the boy genius who crushed giants. Orson Welles. At just 25, he shook Hollywood to its core with Citizen Kane, a film so bold, so groundbreaking, that it changed cinema forever. But behind the brilliance of the boy genius was a man with little patience, a towering ego, and a stormy presence that could unsettle even the most seasoned professionals. Welles didn't walk into Hollywood. He stormed in, demanding full creative control from day one. And somehow he got it. No small feat in an industry ruled by powerful studio heads. But that was Orson, a man who didn't ask. He declared. He was a perfectionist to a punishing degree. Scenes were res-hot endlessly. Actors were kept waiting for hours, or days, until he decided the time was right. Entire crews were pushed to their limits, not always out of necessity, but because Welles believed that only he truly understood the vision. And when he clashed with studio execs, and he always clashed, it wasn't a quiet disagreement. It was a battle of wills. Welles didn't just want control, he demanded it. If you tried to rein him in, he'd find a way to outmaneuver, out-talk, or out-intimidate you. Colleagues admired his genius, but feared his wrath. He was known to dismiss crew members mid-shoot, berate editors, and rewrite scripts at the last second, sometimes while the cameras were already rolling. For Welles, compromise was a dirty word. Yet for all his volatility, the industry kept coming back. Why? Because his brilliance was undeniable. He made magic, even if it left scorched earth behind the scenes. Orson Welles was a creative force of nature, but like any storm, he left destruction in his wake. He didn't just want to make movies. He wanted to reshape Hollywood, and in the process, he bulldozed anyone who got in his way. Marlon Brando, the rebel who refused to play along. Marlon Brando. The name alone changed acting forever. With a whisper, a stare, a shrug, he brought raw realism to the screen like no one before him. A Streetcar Named Desire, On the Waterfront, The Godfather. Brando wasn't just a performer, he was a phenomenon. But off-screen, he was chaos wrapped in charisma, a rebel whose unpredictability often felt like a game of psychological warfare. Brando didn't follow rules. He despised them. Directors couldn't direct him. Co-stars couldn't count on him. And studios? They feared him, even as they fought to sign him. He made it clear from early on, he wasn't there to play the Hollywood game. He was there to burn the board. He famously refused to memorize lines. Sometimes he'd hide cue cards all over the set, taped to walls, furniture, even other actors. He believed that raw emotion mattered more than preparation. But for those working with him, it was exhausting. You never knew if Brando was going to deliver a moment of brilliance or throw the entire production off the rails. Temperamental didn't begin to cover it. He would show up late or not at all. He challenged directors to their faces. If he didn't respect you, he made it known, whether you were a studio executive or an Oscar-winning co-star. And if he thought a scene was beneath him, he'd tank it on purpose. Behind that smoldering intensity was a man constantly testing limits. Power, control, unpredictability, it was all part of the performance. But make no mistake, it came at a cost. Brando left a trail of frustrated directors, alienated castmates, and spiraling budgets wherever he went. Yet somehow, he always emerged untouchable. Because when the cameras rolled, he delivered moments so powerful, so deeply human, that the chaos was almost forgiven. Marlon Brando didn't just transform acting. He redefined what it meant to be a star and made sure no one ever forgot who was really in charge. Robert Mitchum, Hollywood's toughest cool cat with a mean streak. Robert Mitchum. With that sleepy-eyed stare and gravel-coated voice, Mitchum oozed effortless cool. He was the ultimate bad boy of film noir, the kind of guy who didn't need to act tough. He was tough. But behind that laid-back persona was a man known for testing limits and pushing people just far enough to leave a mark. Mitchum didn't care much for Hollywood's rules, or anyone else's, for that matter. On screen, he played rebels and criminals. Off-screen, he blurred the line between character and reality. He had a wicked sense of humor that could turn cutting, even cruel. If you were on set with him, you either laughed with him or braced for when the joke turned on you. He was infamous for teasing co-stars, especially ones who didn't share his devil-may-care energy. He'd mock directors in front of the crew, ad-lib lines just to throw scene partners off, or roll his eyes mid-take if he thought a performance was weak. Subtle? No. Effective? Absolutely. And when it came to authority, forget it. Mitchum clashed with producers, ignored studio expectations, and walked out of interviews if the questions didn't suit him. He wasn't interested in image building. He was interested in doing things his way, and if he didn't like it, he'd shrug and light a cigarette. Many respected him, some even feared him. He had a presence that didn't need volume to be intimidating. But beneath the tough exterior was a temper that simmered. Get on his bad side and you'd know it. Not with yelling or tantrums, Mitchum's style was more cold shoulder, quiet humiliation, or sharp, offhand remarks that cut deeper than any scream ever could. And yet, he never lost that mystique, that charisma, that razor-sharp mix of menace and magnetism. He was the guy you didn't mess with, and somehow everyone loved for it. Robert Mitchum was the man Hollywood couldn't tame. And deep down, he liked it that way. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckler who wielded charm like a weapon. Errol Flynn. He wasn't just a movie star, he was the fantasy. The dashing rogue in Robin Hood, the seductive adventurer with a sword in one hand and a grin on his face. He made audiences swoon and studios millions. But behind the cape and charm, Flynn lived a life far more dangerous than anything he ever filmed. On screen, he was all elegance and mischief. Off screen, the mischief exploded into something much darker. Flynn was notorious in Hollywood circles, not just for his wild partying, but for the way he treated those around him when the spotlight was off. He wasn't just reckless, he was ruthless. He pushed boundaries constantly. Directors complained that he never showed up on time or sober. Crew members told stories of chaos on set, and co-stars, especially women, often found themselves the target of his manipulative charm. If you didn't play along with Flynn, he made sure you paid for it, one way or another. He loved control, over scenes, over people, over the room. He could turn on the charisma in a heartbeat, then withdraw it just as fast, leaving colleagues guessing which version of Flynn they were going to get that day. Many found it thrilling, until they found it terrifying. Flynn's arrogance was legendary. He laughed at the rules, mocked the press, and even taunted studio execs, secure in the knowledge that his popularity protected him. And for a long time it did. No matter how outrageous the behavior, the public still saw the hero in tights and plumed hats, not the man pulling strings and burning bridges behind the scenes. But those closest to him saw the truth. Errol Flynn wasn't just playing the charming rogue. He was the rogue, and behind every wink was a warning. He lived fast, played hard, and left a trail of broken careers and strained partnerships in his wake. Because in Flynn's world, the only person who mattered was Flynn. Spencer Tracy, the respected giant with a dangerous edge. Spencer Tracy. To the public, he was the definition of gravitas, a man of quiet strength, moral depth, and unmatched screen presence. With 2 Oscars and a career full of critical acclaim, Tracy was considered one of the greatest actors of his generation. But behind that stoic exterior was a man wrestling with inner demons, and sometimes everyone else had to pay the price. Tracy was known for his intensity on screen, and he carried that same intensity off set in ways that could turn dark without warning. He demanded control of his environment, scripts, blocking, even the tone on set. And while he wasn't known for public outbursts, the quiet pressure he applied was just as unnerving. There was a storm inside him, and those closest to him often felt the tremors. If something wasn't to his liking, he didn't shout, he'd go cold. Colleagues described him as brooding, unpredictable, and at times quietly domineering. He could make even seasoned actors shrink with a glance. Many directors considered him a dream to film until they disagreed with him. That's when Tracy would dig in, stall scenes, or simply stop cooperating. He was too valuable to fire, too talented to ignore, and he knew it. Then there was the shadow he cast over co-stars. He had a commanding presence that didn't just fill a scene, it sometimes smothered it. If you couldn't keep up, he wouldn't lift you up. He'd let you sink, especially if he didn't respect you, and respect for Tracy was hard-earned and rarely given. Even in his personal relationships, he held the upper hand. Friends walked on eggshells. Studio execs gave him space. And when things got tense, people vanished from his circle, quietly and permanently. Yet the public never saw this side. To them, he was noble, gentle, a man of principle. But inside Hollywood, there was always a quiet understanding. Spencer Tracy was not a man to cross. Walter Matthau, the grump who didn't always act the part. Walter Matthau. Most people remember him as the lovable curmudgeon, the hilariously irritable half of The Odd Couple, the grumpy grandpa in Grumpy Old Men, and the sarcastic wisecracker with a heart of gold. But those who worked closely with Matthau knew the grump wasn't always an act, and sometimes it wasn't so funny. Behind that slow drawl and sly smile was a man with zero patience for incompetence and even less tolerance for nonsense. Matthau didn't suffer fools gladly or quietly. On set, he could be cutting, sarcastic, and brutally dismissive, especially if he felt a scene partner was wasting his time. His barbs weren't loud. They were surgical, delivered with a straight face and just enough bite to leave a sting. And if he took offense, that was your problem. Matthau had no time for egos except his own, which, while rarely flaunted, made itself known in more subtle, chilling ways. He demanded precision, timing, professionalism, and if you didn't deliver, expect a long day. Crew members often reported long silences after Matthau walked through a take with his trademark scowl. No yelling, no tantrum, just that unmistakable sense that you disappointed someone who didn't forget things easily. Even directors, especially young ones, had to earn his respect. Matthau would challenge instructions, rewrite dialogue under his breath, or flat out ignore direction if he thought he knew better. And the truth was, he often did. But that didn't make him easier to work with. 4 co-stars working with Matthau was like dancing on a tightrope. If he liked you, you were golden. If he didn't, you were in for an uphill climb of cold stares, sardonic remarks, and the constant pressure of keeping up. He was brilliant, no doubt. A comic genius with dramatic chops few could match. But behind that genius was a razor-sharp tongue, and a man who didn't care if his bite left a mark. Tony Curtis, the pretty face who didn't play nice. Tony Curtis. He had the looks, the swagger, and a grin that could stop traffic. With roles and hits like Some Like It Hot and Spartacus, he became a 1950s icon, Hollywood's golden boy. But behind the slicked-back hair and megawatt smile was a man who knew exactly how good he looked and wasn't afraid to throw elbows to stay in the spotlight. Curtis came up a hard way, and once he hit the A-list, he fought to stay there. Fiercely competitive, he didn't just want to shine, he wanted to outshine everyone around him. And if you were a co-star, especially another leading man, you were competition, not company. He clashed with directors who challenged him and resented co-stars who got too many close-ups. In scenes, Curtis was known to steal focus, either by exaggerating his movements or subtly undercutting his scene partners. He was charming in interviews, but behind closed doors, many called him vain, demanding, and manipulative. One of his most famous on-set tensions? With none other than Marilyn Monroe during Some Like It Hot. While the film was a comedic masterpiece, filming it was anything but Curtis reportedly complained about Monroe's behavior, yet insiders noted he wasn't exactly easy to work with either. Underneath the charm, Curtis had an ego that filled the room and expected everyone to make space for it. He worked tirelessly to control his image. Any press, photo, or rumor that didn't align with the Tony Curtis brand was a problem. And if someone crossed him publicly, he had a long memory and a sharp tongue to match. In later years, Curtis softened, even poking fun at his own arrogance. But during his prime, he was a Hollywood prince who didn't play by the rules and didn't care who got bruised in the royal court. Tony Curtis was more than a pretty face. He was a master of survival in cutthroat town, and he made sure no one ever forgot it. Steve McQueen, the king of cool who couldn't stand sharing the stage. Steve McQueen, cool, calm, unshakable. Whether flying down a hillside on a motorcycle or standing stone-faced in a standoff, McQueen wasn't just a star, he was a force. But underneath the leather jacket and icy stare was a man fueled by insecurity, ego, and an obsession with being number one, no matter who he had to shove aside to stay there. McQueen didn't like competition. He hated it. On set, he would meticulously count his lines, measure his screen time, and analyze the number of close-ups just to make sure no one else was stealing his thunder. Co-stars who started to shine too bright, he'd shut them down. Fast. Take his legendary feud with Paul Newman on the towering Inferno. McQueen demanded equal billing. Not just equal billing, perfectly symmetrical billing. His name had to appear exactly the same height and distance from Newman's in every poster. It wasn't a creative collaboration, it was a silent war. Even directors had to navigate his need for control. If McQueen didn't like the way a scene was shaping up, he'd refuse to shoot it. If a line didn't sound cool enough, he'd cut it. He made his own rules and expected everyone else to fall in line. And most of the time they did. He was known to give silent treatment to cast members he didn't respect, or worse, sabotage scenes to shift the focus back to himself. Crew members spoke of long days, tense silences, and a sense that everything revolved around McQueen's mood. But the strangest part, he was still magnetic. That simmering tension, that razor-thin line between composure and eruption, it pulled people in. He was electric, unpredictable, and absolutely commanding. And that's exactly how he wanted it. Steve McQueen wasn't just the king of cool. He was the king of control. And if you stepped on his throne, even accidentally, you'd know it before the day was out. James Cagney, the tough guy who took the act off camera. James Cagney, the original gangster of the silver screen. With fiery eyes and a machine gun delivery, he redefined the Hollywood anti-hero in films like Public Enemy and Angels with dirty faces. But that trademark intensity didn't fade when the cameras stopped rolling. In fact, it often intensified. Cagney wasn't just acting tough. He was tough. Born in the backstreets of New York City, he brought that street-smart edge to every set he stepped on. And while he wasn't known for tantrums or tabloid scandals, Cagney had a different kind of power, quiet, calculated, and utterly immovable. He ran his career like a battlefield. Directors didn't direct him, they negotiated. If he didn't agree with a scene, a line, or a co-star's delivery, he'd shut it down. Cold. He didn't yell, didn't argue. He just wouldn't do it. And once he made up his mind, not even the studio heads could sway him. Cagney expected perfection, and if you didn't bring it, you weren't worth his time. Co-stars often spoke of feeling steamrolled in scenes, like they were extras in his movie. His mere presence commanded respect, but also a certain level of fear. You never wanted to be the one who slowed down a Cagney shoot. He was also deeply suspicious of Hollywood politics. Contracts, studio deals, press spin, he didn't trust any of it. He fought Warner Brothers tooth and nail for creative control and walked away from deals that most stars would kill for. Why? Because Cagney wasn't playing the fame game, he was playing his game. To his fans, he was the ultimate screen tough guy. But in real life, he was every bit as uncompromising. The smile was rare, the softness guarded, and the message clear. Step into a scene with James Cagney, and you better be ready to fight for your place. Kirk Douglas, the chin of steel with a will to match. Kirk Douglas, that cleft chin, that explosive energy, that larger-than-life presence. He was a gladiator on screen, a force of nature behind the scenes, and one of the most driven and feared men to ever stalk a Hollywood soundstage. Douglas didn't just want success. He demanded it. Relentless, razor-focused, and unapologetically ambitious, he bulldozed his way through an industry filled with powerful men, and he outmuscled nearly all of them. On set, he was a perfectionist, not just with himself, but with everyone else. Directors were pushed. Co-stars were challenged. If he thought you weren't giving 110%, he'd call you out. Right there, in front of everyone. And it didn't matter how big your name was. Douglas had no fear when it came to confrontation. He was known for wresting control from directors and rewriting lines that didn't serve his screen presence. Not because he didn't respect the craft, but because he believed he was the craft. His production company allowed him unprecedented power, and he used it. Whether that meant reshaping entire scripts or recasting roles, Douglas made it clear when he was on the call sheet, he was in charge. There was a fire in him, sometimes inspiring, sometimes intimidating. He carried himself like a general, and if you couldn't keep up, you were left behind. Many co-stars admired his focus. Others quietly resented the way he dominated scenes, demanded the spotlight, and often took credit for creative victories that belonged to the group. Even his iconic role in Spartacus wasn't just acting, it was a message. He was the man who broke the rules. He openly challenged the Hollywood blacklist by hiring a blacklisted writer and dared the system to come for him. It was bold. It was legendary. And it was very, very Kirk Douglas. He didn't make many friends along the way, but he made history. And in the golden age of Hollywood, that was the only prize that really mattered. Old Hollywood gave us some of the greatest performances ever captured on film, moments that defined generations and shaped cinema forever. But behind those unforgettable roles were real people, complicated, flawed, and driven by ambition, ego, and sometimes intimidation. These 14 stars weren't just actors, they were titans. And like all titans, their impact came with shadows. If you found this look behind the curtain as fascinating as we did, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories, hidden truths, and the legends you thought you knew. Tap the bell so you never miss a chapter in Hollywood history. Because in this town, the real drama didn't always happen on the screen.